Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
At the beginning of the 20th century, 9 decades ago, the British Empire was at its zenith. Queen Victoria reigned and the British government ruled India through its civil servants. The Indian civil service, the steel frame of administration, was their backbone. Of course, as Prime Minister Lloyd George put it, they were the heaven-born ICS. In 1901, in the undivided India, a child was born in Lahore. He was destined to be a member of the Indian civil service by dint of merit and merit alone. He made a name for himself. He is GD Khosla, Gopal Das Khosla, who later became Chief Justice of the Punjab High Court. Justice Khosla indeed lived through a trying time, a difficult period, when the entire free world was practicing the concept of ideal government of Abraham Lincoln, that is the government of the people, by the people and for the people. We in India were under the British Raj, and the British had their own concept, that is the government by the British, for the British and of the British. Nevertheless, many a meritorious man broke the British monopoly of the Indian civil service. Justice Khosla is one of them. He is a versatile writer, a legal luminary, a man of many parts. Today, he is a young man of 88 years. We are happy to have him in our midst this evening. And Justice Khosla, may we share the joys and sorrows of your 88 years of life today?
Well, luckily there have not been many sorrows, but at the beginning I had a very happy time as a child in Delhi. I stayed here from 1911 to 1915, and I went to school. And apart from what I learnt in school, I acquired a passion for Persian and for Urdu and Persian poetry. In fact, I even indulge in writing ghazals and reading them at mushairas, and sometimes there was acclaim, sometimes perhaps it did not come up to the mark of the listeners, there was silence. Those were my, I think, very happy days. And from there I went on to so-called European College at Missouri, St. George's College, where I read for the senior Cambridge, local senior Cambridge used to be called, and then I went to Cambridge.
Oh, did you meet any prominent Indians in Cambridge?
Almost in my very first year, I met Subhash Chandra Bose, who later became very prominent. He had just passed into the ICS and was contemplating resigning. So when I saw him, I said to him, well, you are resigning from the ICS and I have come to Cambridge to read for the mathematical tripos and ultimately to sit for the ICS. He looked at me with some disdain, as much as to say I was doing the wrong thing. And I said very quietly, well, every Indian in the ICS keeps an Englishman out.
You are
and
right.
To that extent, an Indian is helping the cause of his country.
Yes, you are breaking the British monopoly of the ICS. By the way, at the Cambridge, what was the session like? Did you have to work very hard or you had long vacations?
Well, yes and no. Life in Cambridge is very full. Not only you go to lectures and study, but that seems to be not such an important part of the academic career in Cambridge and Oxford, at least in those days, because there were so many other things. Sport was almost a must. You had to, I was more or less bullied into rowing, which I gave up. Then I played tennis, hockey, football and running. But there were many other activities like joining clubs, music, the union. And during the vacation one had to work, because in those days the academic terms were only 5.5 months in the year and the vacations were 6.5 months.
Oh.
So one had to work very hard during the vacation. So I remember I used to spend all my vacations in summer resorts during winter and in winter resorts during summer, so that I should have the quiet and it also would be cheaper.
So vacation did not mean that you could hang your books somewhere else and they just go fishing, boating or something. You had to be at the books also, at your
No,
desk.
one had to with the books. I used to work 6 or 7 hours a day, but then I used to have a good time, go out, and I did even a little boating, a little mountain climbing, and walking about, seeing theatres in London. But it was a very enjoyable and full vacation, not just a holiday.
Yeah. Since you took to rowing, that brings me to mind the race that the Cambridge and Oxford University boys have. Did you participate in that?
No, that I never got so good as that, because the Oxford and Cambridge is between the two best eights of Cambridge and Oxford, and this is a tremendous event. We used to go and see it. And now that I'm a member of the Oxford and Cambridge Society of India, we always have a big dinner party on the boat race day. And that dinner party is held in the house of the British High Commissioner, where we all Oxford and Cambridge people meet and listen to the broadcasts of the boat race. But it's a big event, but I never was one of the rowers.
Yeah, never mind the race, at least the dinner is on.
Yes, quite.
Now, a moment back you mentioned that when you said you were to join the ICS and Netaji looked at you with some disdain, then apparently you were inspired to join the ICS. What was it that inspired you to join the ICS?
Well, fundamentally perhaps it was that I wanted a good job, but then also there was a feeling that I should do something for India, because I had been reading about what the ICS were doing, and they were doing those days only 2 or 3 Indians in the ICS, and I had met only one of them. And well, I thought that I don't see why I should not also join.
Yes.
And so I sat for the competitive examination, which was fairly stiff, and with a certain amount of luck and my own hard work, I passed and came out to India.
Now, the ICS was British dominated, whereas you were an Indian. Did you feel discriminated against?
Yes and no. For one thing, in the matter of postings, I felt that the Indians did not get the best postings. But in the matter of promotion and service, I thought, and I am convinced that they were very fair. For instance, when I was a sessions judge and a time came for my appointment to the High Court, I was superseded 4 people who were above me in the service, and 2 of them were British.
Oh.
But there was no protest on any kind, because I suppose they all felt that I deserved it. But
Yes.
this is in strong contrast to what happens today. If there's a supersession by anyone, there are strikes, lawyers' strikes, judges' strikes, newspaper writings and so on.
Yes.
Some of it may be justified, but I fear not all.
Mr. Khosla, you said you were a sessions judge. Now, of course, I know many ICS officers went for judiciary, but the general concept was that those who were in the executive from ICS, they had more perks and privileges, the district magistrates, the governors and so on. So, what was it that prompted you to join the judiciary?
It's partly because my father was a judge, and when I consulted him, he said, "Son, you will be much better off in the judicial. There in the executive, there are these perks and a false kind of dignity which really means nothing at all, because it belongs to office, not to your person, and you will have your fond of writing and reading, you will have plenty of time in the judicial, whereas in the executive you will be called upon to attend to your duty on all holidays like Muharram, Holi, Dussehra, when there might be a communal outbreak."
Law and order problem.
Yes, law and order problem. But in the judicial, you will hear about these things 2 or 3 months later when they come to you in the form of a case. In the meantime, you can have an easy time, you do your work in court and you come away.
Yes.
And I never felt sorry.
Yeah. Now, from sessions, did you go up to High Court?
Yes, I was appointed to the High Court in 1943. I was at the time the youngest judge. And
You were just 42 years old.
yes, well, one thing is never counted against me. I had tried a case against, filed by the Tribune, editor of the Tribune, Pyare Mohan Dattatreya, and he had filed this case of damages against a British police officer who had touched him and not let him cover the Simon Commission's arrival in Lahore. Nobody else was willing to try this case. When it was sent to me, I willingly took it, and ultimately I decided it in favor of the Tribune editor and awarded damages. It was never held against me by the British government.
Although you had awarded the judgment against the British
In
government.
fact, I
the
was
police-
told that the Tribune was hesitated to file an appeal in case a British judge heard the case and decided and upset my decision. And the British government did not file an appeal in case somebody enhanced the damages.
Yes.
So it was remained there.
When did you become Chief Justice?
I became Chief Justice in 1959.
And what were your feelings when you were made the Chief Justice and you signed the Visitor's Book?
Well, I felt very gratified, for one thing, because everybody said such nice things about me, and at that time I thought I deserved them all. But when I come to consider it, perhaps some of them were undeserved, some of them just said out of politeness. But it was very gratifying. The Tribune wrote a very flattering article, and I was made a lot of fuss of. And also it was good because I felt that I could do something for the High Court, which I think I did. One of the things that I did do was that I was able to dismiss 3 corrupt session judges in a very novel manner, because I called them one by one and said to them, look, I cannot bring a case against you, but what I will do is I will take away all your work and put in an additional in your court, and so you won't be able to show your face because you will be left without work. You can draw your salary, but you'll have no work, and I would like to have your resignation within a week. So all 3 of them, one by one, they sent in their resignations. In fact, the Chief Minister of Cairo, of Punjab, met me soon after this, and he congratulated me. He said that I was going to speak to you about this matter, but you have solved this in a brilliant manner.
Very good. Now that brings me to the point, I mean, since there are judges and judges, some are good, some are not so good, some are honest, some are dishonest. But a very burning problem is about the contempt of court cases. Now in contempt of court, the judge starts the proceedings himself. I mean, he is the prosecutor, he is the judge. Isn't it a negation of the basic principle of jurisprudence?
Yes, in a way it is, but I think the judge should have the power. In the old days, the relations between the lawyer and the judge were very good. I remember the case of a very famous lawyer, Nandlal, Dr. Nandlal of Lahore. He was given to taking no nonsense, but he was never prosecuted for contempt of court. On one occasion, he was appearing before a High Court judge in Lahore, and his case was very weak. So he was putting forward arguments which were not really driving his case home. So the judge lost his patience and said, rubbish. After a minute he said, nonsense. Then he said again, rubbish, nonsense. So Dr. Nandlal put his papers down on the table and, looking very straight and very polite, said, I am very sorry, your lordship, that nothing but rubbish and nonsense comes out of your lordship's mouth. So that quietened him, and the judge looked at me and smiled. He took the insult. Well, it was a way of, if not an insult, certainly an answer back. So in this way, the relations were good, and the lawyers took no nonsense and the judges took no nonsense.
Yes.
But they didn't go to the extreme step of prosecuting people for contempt.
Yeah. Did you take on any foreign assignments also after retirement?
Yes, I was asked to go work under the British government, and I was sent on a commission, Commonwealth Commission of Inquiry, to British Guiana. I did that very well indeed, and actually, if I may be forgiven some little lack of modesty, I'd like to read out what the chairman of the commission said to me. He says, my dear Khosla, I find it difficult to express my admiration of your first draft. It is a real tour de force. I have a mere 2 or 3 small suggestions. And the lawyer of the commission, the advocate of the commission, he wrote, Dear Judge, I have just read your report from end to end, and several times, with enormous admiration and enjoyment. I shall read it many times more. I knew it would be good, but it surpasses all expectations. So I feel very flattered that even in the British High Court judge and a British Queen's Counsel
appreciated you
had
tremendously.
Done, yes.
Now, Justice Khosla, you mentioned at the beginning that you joined Judiciary, you were fond of writing and all. How many books have you written?
I've written 18 books in all. They're all kinds, not
Some
one
of the
particular
important titles.
subject. The first one I wrote was Stern Reckoning. This was a history of the events which led to the partition of India and the events subsequently. This I was asked to do by the government of India, in fact Mr. Nehru. And in those days a lot of material was given to me, but I had the occasion at my request of seeing Pandit Nehru every fortnight at lunch.
Yes.
And I developed a great friendship with him, and I think he
Yes.
was a wonderful man in many ways.
Yes.
And at my request later, he wrote a foreword to my book, of Mountains and Men, and he came to Manali at my request twice.
Lovely writings indeed. Now, I find that you are in good health at this age, and many young men would certainly like to draw inspiration from you. What is the secret of your good health?
Well, I suppose I had a good health to start with, but I've been regular and not given up things, not taken too much things. I always reminded of a professor of English that I met in Cambridge. He met me one day, he said, I've been to the doctor, and the doctor asked me silly questions. He said, do you smoke? I said, yes, in moderation. Do you drink? And the professor said, never more than I can hold as a gentleman. So in the same way, I feel that I am moderate in both these things, and I've been very fond of sport and exercise.
Yes.
I do my yoga every morning,
Yes.
even now.
And of course, sense of humor. It's very nice to have you with us this evening. Thank you very much, Justice Khosla.